everyone, welcome to another video, specifically the first wrap-up, of 2023, as in the wrap-up of the first books I read in 2023. We're going to do things a little bit differently today. I don't know about you, I was just getting bored of the and then I read this, and then I read this, and then I read this format. So today, we're going to be ranking the books I read in January, starting with the worst book I read this month, going all the way up to the best book I read this month. I think it's going to be fun. We can divide things up by what star rating, because I always forget to tell you what I rated it. So that way we can divide it up by star rating. And yeah, it'll just be a little bit of a twist on the usual format. Before we get started, this month I took part in the Immune Read-Along with Tandem Collective. This is a non-fiction book all about your immune system, and it is so interesting. It's brilliant, it's fascinating. I will obviously be talking about this in this video, but, and this is a little spoiler given that I've just said this is a ranking, we won't be talking about this till towards the end of the video, and I won't have enough time to go in depth as to how much I enjoyed it. So, you should go watch my reading vlog and full review and discussion on it. Link in the description and in the card if I remember to put it there. There we go. Let's get on with the books. I don't think I've ever included DNFs in a wrap-up before. Most of the time when I DNF a book, it's not because it's a bad book, it's because it just wasn't for me. And I don't feel like I can review a book that I haven't completed. But I am going to talk to you about a book that I DNF'd in January, because I DNF'd it because I thought it was bad. And that is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis, which everyone is obsessed with at the moment, which is why I read it. I got it on NetGalley about a year ago and only just read it and got 20% through, and I was like, I cannot do this anymore. There were two reasons why I stopped reading this book. The first one, the writing style, it was written in a very sort of whimsical and light-hearted way, which usually I enjoy, except that the writing style didn't change when very tragic, traumatic things were happening, which was very jarring and not in a good way, by which I mean I think it was done for effect and that effect was not realised. And the second reason is that it included a trope which I think I'm going to call the time-travelling feminist. So it's a book set in the past, but a woman with modern-day feminist values is mad at her fellow mid-20th century women for not understanding the nuances of second-wave feminism yet. And that just really, really annoys me. And you see it quite a lot in historical fiction, and I get it. This was like a whole other extent. And she would just spend so much time ranting out loud and internally to us about how her world wasn't like ours, except she shouldn't know what our world is like because she's from the past. And then she would talk about how her fellow women would agree with her, but then she knew that secretly they just wanted to have husbands and settle down and not have a day of responsibility in their lives. And it was just so, I just could not. So there we go. First time for everything, the first time I've reviewed a DNF on this channel was Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. That aside, it was a pretty good reading month. So the next book, which is my least favourite of the books that I finished, I did still give 3 stars. And that is Jade is a Twisted Green by Tanya Turton. This is a literary fiction about a woman from Caribbean descent who lives in Canada, and it's about her dealing with the loss of her sister and also the sort of various romantic threads in her life. Some of it was beautifully written, some of it was very badly written. It was just such a mixed bag. Quite often I think with 3 stars, sometimes I give a book 3 stars because the whole thing was kind of meh, it was fine. Sometimes I give a book 3 stars because I loved parts of it and hated other parts, and this was one of those books. There was supposed to be these 2 big romances and this kind of love triangle thing going on, but apart from the fact that she kept saying how much she loved these people, There was no like emotional connection to them. So the family grief storyline, really, really loved. The romance storyline, I was not invested at all. Next up, still in 3 stars, and I did do a reading vlog on this one, which I will link in the description, but it was A Most Intriguing Lady by Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, and her ghostwriter. Although according to an article I read, the publishers were pleasantly surprised by how involved Sarah Ferguson wanted to be. This is a Victorian historical romance, and you know what? It was fine. I had a great time. There were some inconsistencies, to put it mildly, in the plot, in the characterisation, but it was a fun romance with a fun mystery-solving element to it. A jolly time was had, even if some of it had me going, ugh. The next one was a bit of a letdown for me, and that's because it's the second book in a series, and I loved the first book, gave it 5 stars, and the second one didn't quite do it for me, and that is Fireflies by Lynette Bacon Nguyen. And this is one of those book series, it's got a kind of cinematic universe structure to it, so the different books happen in the same universe but have different characters and different tones, and you know, it's like, basically it would be like if you loved Guardians of the Galaxy because of the sense of humour and the camaraderie, and then you watch Winter Soldier expecting the same thing. That was the reason I didn't enjoy it so much. The things I loved in the first book were the friendships and the camaraderie and the sense of humour, and that was all kind of changed in this one. So that's sort of why I didn't really enjoy it so much. I will almost certainly be picking up the next one though, because I do really enjoy this world and the world building is really, really great. I just didn't particularly connect to these characters or this kind of tone of this particular book. Another one where a low rating, but I'm going to continue with the series, is Lost in Time by A.L. Lester. I have been a reviewer for A.L. Lester for quite a long time now, and I really, really love their books. And this is their first ever book, which is now available on Spotify as an audiobook. So they kindly sent me an audio code, and it was really fun. It was great. Obviously, I did give it 3 stars. It was also a debut novel, so there were, you know, a few inconsistencies with the historical setting and with the plot, which I'm currently listening to the second book in the series, and those kind of plot holes have been ironed out and kind of explained more, which I'm very grateful for. So there were quite a lot of things that didn't quite work for me. The pacing was a bit off at the start, things like that. But the imagination of the world was brilliant. The different characters, I love them all so much. A.L. Lester's characters, chef's kiss, love them all. It felt like reading part 1 of a bigger book rather than book 1 of a series, and I'm so glad that I've continued because I'm on book 2 at the moment, and it's so good. It's so good. Right, we are into 4-star realm now, but only just. So Lost in Time was kind of a, should I give it 3, should I give it 4? I'll give it 3. This next one was a 3, 4, I'll give it 4. And that is Becoming Ted by Matt Cain, and this was another audiobook I listened to. And it was really fun. I really enjoyed listening to it. It had so much heart. It was wonderful. But I also had my issues with it, which is why it was kind of just screeched into that 4-star zone. So Ted is a man in his early 40s who has just split up from his husband, and he decides he's going to take this opportunity to work towards a dream he's always had, which is to become a drag queen. As soon as I found that out, I was fully sold. We're going to circle back to that in a moment, but love the main plotline. Glorious little town. He works in an ice cream shop, but he secretly hates ice cream. There was just so much like loveliness to it. But everyone in this book had a tragic backstory. And when I say everyone, I mean literally everyone. There were so many tragic backstories that they didn't all get the airtime they deserved. And so they kind of like fell flat by the end. By the end, it would literally just be like, such and such explained that, and then detail like decades of abuse or something. And it didn't, there was too much in there. There was way too much in there, and I think if 1 or 2 of the subplots had been cut, then the whole story could have just breathed a little bit more and it would have felt much better balanced. So I said I'd circle back to the main plot, and that's because the main plot, i.e. Ted wanting to be a drag queen, isn't actually mentioned on the book. And I only found out about this after I'd already got it from NetGalley, and then I saw the author talking about it on Instagram. I was like, no way! If that had been on the blurb, I 100% would have downloaded it. I mean, I did anyway, but I was on the fence about it. Why wasn't it on the blurb? And then the book I'm reading at the moment, not quite as extreme as that, but there's also a similar vibe to Becoming Ted, which I have decided in my head to describe as queer books written for straight people. So the main storyline is all about finding yourself and finding joy and coming out or being accepted in your community. It's got all those rainbows and sparkles and unicornness to it, which we love. That's why I've picked these books up, because queer joy. But this book is mostly marketed towards straight people, so they also want to hammer down to the straight people, hey, just so you know, it can be tough out there. So yeah, that was the vibe. The audiobook was great though, the narrator was really good. I did have a really enjoyable time listening to it. As I said, I did give it 4 stars, but there were just some things that really, really frustrated me with this one. We're moving our way up through the 4 stars, and one of the challenges I set myself at the start of the year was to read at least 1 book a month set in another country, ideally by an author from that country or with a connection to that country in some way. And so for January, I chose The Winter Palace by Eva Stachniak. This is a book about the young Catherine the Great from the perspective of one of her ladies-in-waiting who is also kind of a spy to her and her predecessor. And I really, really enjoyed it. It was very compelling, very absorbing, and a bit of a slower paced read. It did take me a while to get through this one, but very interesting read, and all about a part of history that I didn't know very much about. I didn't realise quite how many of the people in this period of Russian history were women in power. Like, I didn't know quite how much Catherine the Great was very much the empress rather than the emperor's wife, if that makes sense. I didn't know anything about that. So that was really interesting, and to see the way that all these women kind of manipulated the world they were in to suit them and their ends was a really interesting read. Still on the 4 stars, Sorry Bro by Talene Voskuni. This is a sapphic romance set in San Francisco between 2 Armenian-American women. And there were kind of 2 main storylines in this book. So you had the romance, which was definitely more rom than com. It's marketed as a rom-com. There were some funny moments. I wouldn't say it was a comedy, you know. But you had that romance between the 2 women. And then on the other side, you had the main character, Nare, going through a kind of learning to appreciate and be better connected with her Armenian heritage. That Armenian heritage is so central to this book. Every chapter starts with an Armenian proverb. And what I really, really loved about this book, and what I thought it did so well, is it kind of showed that no part of our identity is isolated from the other parts of our identity. So in order for Nare to be comfortable coming out, she also needs to be comfortable in her heritage and her culture. She also needs to be more confident at work. And all of those things kind of boost each other along, and just show how interconnected all those aspects of our lives are. There were a couple of eye-rolly moments and a couple of times that the main character did annoy me a little bit. But on the whole, a really fun romance, a really nice story with clear passion at its heart. And then at the top of the 4 stars, just eking in to that 5-star range, is Mrs. Death by Selena Godin, which I read for my Buzzword reading challenge pick this month. I loved this book so much. It was so beautifully written. It was so moving. It was just, it's something else. Really, really something else. The story follows Wolf, who is a young man interviewing Death for her memoirs, and she is a woman. She is a black woman, often a homeless woman, because she is someone invisible who you walk past not noticing, which I thought was a really good twist on that depiction of death. Part of it is written in prose, part of it is written in poetry. There are little odd nuggets and objects and themes that kind of crop up throughout the whole book. Very weird, very abstract, absolutely brilliant. So why did you give it 4 stars, I hear you cry? Because the end just kind of, About halfway through the book, we got all these ideas introduced that made us question the existence of Mrs. Death as a personification, made us question Wolf's mental state and his background and what's going on in his head, and is this all real? And it all became a little bit more meta, and I loved it. And then it sort of stopped. Those themes just weren't really carried through to the end. And, you know, I'm very happy to have an open-ended, things left unanswered. I love that, you know? Like a Life of Pi style, who knows what the real truth is. I would have loved that. But there was no kind of follow through to see what the possibilities could be, if that makes any sense. So that did knock a star off in the end. But what an incredible book. And I'm very excited to see if Selena Godden writes a new novel, because I will be getting my hands on that. Before we get started on my 5-star reads in January, I've got 2 honourable mentions. So the first one is a reread, Emma by Jane Austen. I listened to the audiobook narrated by the wonderful Jenny Agutter. It felt wrong to rank it alongside all these books I've just read for the first time, because I will always love Emma, and it will always be one of, if not the best book written by Jane Austen. And yes, it's wonderful, and Emma is just, she's so frustrating, but I love her so much because, you know, she's as we all were when we were 20 and thought we knew everything. And like, this is the first time reading it this time round that I really realised she's never actually successfully made any matches. She said, oh hey, wouldn't it be cute if those 2 got together? And they did, and she had nothing to do with it. And that's become her whole identity, and I just, she just, oh dear. But that's the joy of the story, is that she goes on that journey and falls in love with Mr. Knightley. And I really appreciated Jane Fairfax's character as well this time round, much more. I mean, every time I read it, I love Jane a bit more. So yeah, it was glorious. Of course it was. The other honourable mention is Spare by Prince Harry. Again, I did a reading vlog, which I will link in the description, so you can see my full thoughts on this one. The reason I didn't rank it or give it a rating is it's a memoir. You know, it felt wrong to rate this book on the same scale as the other books I've mentioned. Are there some things I wish I didn't now know about Prince Harry? Yes. But was this also a very moving examination of grief and loneliness and what it's like to be in the weirdest family in the world? Yes. So I didn't give this one a rating in the end, but it was still good. I think if you are intrigued to read it, you should read it, because the headlines about it do not reflect the majority of the book itself. And I think that if you would like to get involved on the discussion regarding this book and the things in it, then you should also read it before you do that. So yeah, those are my 2 cents. On to the 5-star reads, the best books that I read this month, and there are quite a few of them, so we'll whiz through them pretty quickly. First of all, Queer Body Power by Essie Dennis. This is kind of a self-help book, but more of a self-appreciation book. It's got all sorts in here. It's about how queer people's bodies are policed, how they are treated in medicine, the history of queer people's relationship with our bodies, how it's different for many queer people, not just trans and non-binary people, but for cis people too, that our ideas of self-presentation to the world are very different from heteronormative ideals. I thought it was a really good balance of research and anecdotes and interviews. There was so many different perspectives brought into this that there's so much just to take away from it. So really, really good book. Highly recommend reading it if it's something that you are interested in. Moving up through the 5 stars, Friday I'm in Love by Cameron Garrett. I was I was a mess at the end of this book. A full emotional mess at the queer joy. It was glorious. First of all, this cover is just beautiful. I saw this cover on NetGalley and was like, yes, give it to me now. And the story is about a young woman, Mahalia. She is a junior in high school or a sophomore. I don't know how American it works. I don't know. She's one of those. She's like in the middle of high school. And she never had a Sweet 16 party. So she decides she's going to throw herself a coming out party instead. And throughout the course of the book, she's saving up for this party. She's planning it. She's buying her dress. And things go wrong. You know, stuff happens in her family, in her personal life, at school. And by the end, it all works out. And it was just lovely. All these different things happen throughout the book, and what I really liked at the start of each chapter, then it had her bank statement, because the whole sort of framing device is that she's saving for this party, right? So you have this bank statement at the start of each chapter, and I thought that was just a really good way to tie together all the different threads. You know, why she's taking on extra shifts at her job at the supermarket, the like financial struggles she and her mum are going through. All of those things were kind of kept track of through that, and I thought that was a really good device. And yes, the ending was glorious. It was lovely. We are nearly there, my friends. We're nearly there. Coming in at third place for my January reads, I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver. That's really hard to say when you have a cold. Just going to put that out there. This was my book club's pick for this month and follows a teenager called Ben who comes out as non-binary and is thrown out of the house by their parents. They move high schools, move in with their sister who they haven't spoken to in about 10 years, and it's about them healing from that trauma and finding their place, finding friendship, finding a little bit of romance in there as well. It had so much heart, this book. I wanted to like reach in and give Ben a hug and tell them it would all be okay. I thought it depicted the complexities and nuances of all these different relationships so well, and yes, it was just very moving, very emotional read. So coming in second place, Different for Boys by Patrick Ness. I don't know the last time I read a Patrick Ness book. I was obsessed with Patrick Ness as a teenager. I think he's the only author I've been to a book signing for. Like, I have signed books, but he's the only one I've like been to a signing for. I would like get the first release of every single one of his books, and then as I grew up and just kind of, you know, wasn't in the target audience anymore, I just sort of stopped picking them up. And then this one came up on NetGalley, and I thought, you know what? I'm gonna read another Patrick Ness book, like it's 2012. And there's a reason he was my favourite writer for a fair chunk of my teen years. This book is a little novella, and it was so powerful and so impactful, and just by the end I was just like a jelly blob, just like I'm ruined, I'm finished, I'm done. As I said, it's a novella, it's a short story about 4 boys who all go to an all-boys school, and it's about the relationships between them, and the main character especially, his journey with himself and with the different relationship he has with each of his 3 friends. There's a lot about intimacy, especially for boys and especially for queer boys, and how that is different from the heteronormative thing we're told. It's also illustrated, which really increased the impact of the story. And the sort of little twist, there's always a little twist with Patrick Ness, always a twist. The little twist, the kind of gimmick, was that all of the explicit words and phrases were blacked out, like they would be censored in like a World War I letter. And the characters knew about this, so they would deliberately say things that we couldn't see, partly to like mess with us, but also later on it would be like, I don't want you to see this, so I'm gonna mask it. And at the start, I'm gonna be honest, I was not a fan at the very start. Because I think the whole idea was that it was like, this is what teenagers do and say, but we're not allowed to pretend that they do. In TV, you never see that sort of thing. Which, you know, is true. But then I got thinking about TikTok. Bearing in mind I'm a very much millennial who does not understand TikTok. And how censorship on TikTok, which even if you're not on TikTok, you will have seen because it has bled into other parts of the internet, that censorship is so outrageous that you now have to clarify what like every single word means, because it might be code for something else that the app has decided you can't say. So when I started thinking about that, I was like, you know what, this is genius. This is genius. So yes, loved Different for Boys, absolutely brilliant. Now you've probably figured out what the last book that I'm going to talk about is, because I've already told you what it is. And that is Immune by Philip Detmer. That is another name and title that you cannot say when you have a cold, which is ironic. As I said, all of my in-depth review, thoughts, discussion is on the reading vlog, which you should go and watch. But the kind of brief overview is this was fascinating. I feel like I know more and understand more about my immune system, and the things I don't understand I'm still impressed by, and I still think are pretty cool, pretty neat that our bodies do that. So generally I have a better understanding and appreciation for what our bodies can do, and it was so much fun to read, really accessible, very cinematically written. There were loads of kind of extended metaphors or dramatizations of what happens, which really brought it all to life. As you can see, I have put many, many tabs in this book because there's so much that I wanted to remember and come back to. And it also, I mean, the cover is gorgeous. The end pages are gorgeous. And the diagrams, let me find one for you. The diagrams are also gorgeous. Generally just a wonderful, wonderful book. So, like I said, all links in the description for this one. We made it to the end. That was a bonkers number of books. Like a really bonkers number of books. You can tell I had that like start of the year energy to read loads of books, and I also had the first week off work. The combination of the two meant I really got through a lot this month. If you are interested in reading any of the books that I've told you about, then do let me know. And also let me know what you read in January. Give me some recommendations to add to my honestly daunting TBR. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and you can click on the subscribe button if you would like to see more of me. Hopefully I won't have a cold next time, and I will see you next time. Ta-ra for now.